"She's not talking," Callan said quietly. "She won't even look at me." I opened the front door, and there she was. Sloane, 8 years old, eyes too still for someone so young, clutching her backpack like it held her spine together. She didn't speak, didn't even glance up. Just walked past me into the house, her footsteps soft but solid, like she already knew she wouldn't belong. Callan followed with 2 suitcases, both frayed at the handles, and offered a small, worn-out apology. "We'll be living here," he said, "just until I figure things out." I nodded, not because I had answers, but because there was no one else to nod to. The house, once filled with the hum of radio static and garden wind chimes, quieted in a way I wasn't used to. Not peaceful quiet, just absence. Sloane said nothing during meals. She moved slowly, mechanically, like someone doing a job they didn't want. At night, I'd walk past her door and hear no sound, no breathing, just stillness. I made her favorite food, not that she knew it was me who used to cook it when she was smaller. She didn't touch it. I offered to show her the back garden where the tomatoes had come in early. She shook her head without looking at me. Another time, I asked if she wanted to help water the basil. She flinched like I'd raised my hand. Callan tried in his way. He read to her sometimes, sat near her on the couch. But there was a heaviness in him too, a slump in his voice, like guilt was living where love used to sit. I didn't push, but every morning I opened the curtains in her room and set down a clean glass of water. I started humming again when I cooked, not loud, just enough to remind the walls we were still living. My name is Corinne, 62, widow. I've lived in this Oregon town all my life. I used to run the flower stall by the library. Won Best Snapdragons 3 years in a row. Still keep the ribbons tucked in a drawer I barely open anymore. My house isn't grand, but it's mine. My husband built the fence before his hands gave out. The garden out back has fed more than just our family neighbors. Friends, even strays. But nothing I've ever nurtured came close to how fragile Sloane was that first week. She floated through the rooms like someone who didn't trust the floor to hold her. No tantrums, no shouts, just eerie quiet. She whispered sometimes to Callan when they thought I wasn't around. Hushed little phrases behind doors. Snippets I didn't try to catch. Not until I did. It was a Tuesday. I'd left a basket of folded laundry outside her room. I didn't mean to listen, but then I heard it. Grandma made Mommy go away. I leaned my back against the wall, holding the handle of the basket like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Those 6 words undid something in me. I waited until the house settled, then went to Callan. Asked him directly. He sighed and rubbed his face like the answer hurt to say. She got that from her mom, he admitted. Said it right after the move. I didn't know how to explain anything different. I nodded once. He didn't offer more, and I didn't push. What was I supposed to say? That I'd kept my mouth shut when his wife stopped coming home before dark. That I knew something was wrong months before the papers were signed. Sloane hadn't just lost her home. She'd been handed a villain to blame. And I'd been handed silence in return. The next day, I baked muffins, the kind she used to love. I left 2 on a napkin at the edge of the table. She didn't eat them. The garden was quiet that day, overcast but still warm enough that the soil held a little breath. I was trimming marigolds, trying to keep my hands busy, and my thoughts still when I felt her behind me. No sound, just presence. I didn't turn right away. Just let the moment settle. When I did, she was there, Sloane standing a few feet back, holding her coat closed with both arms, like a secret. She took one hesitant step forward, then another. Her eyes met mine for a second, before dropping. Carefully, she unzipped her coat and opened the fold of her hand. Inside was a handkerchief, and inside that, a bird. Small, trembling, One wing bent at a wrong angle. Its chest moved, but just barely. She was in the street. Sloane whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. I didn't know where else to take her. I crouched slowly, wiping my hands on my apron. I didn't reach too fast. I just held them out, palms open. You came to the right place. She looked relieved but didn't smile. I could see how tightly she was holding herself together, as if one wrong word would make her flee. I nodded toward the porch. We'll make her a soft bed. Give her some water. Let's see what she needs. She followed, without speaking, staying close, but not too close. Like a stray testing the edge of a door, inside, we lined a shoebox with a clean cloth. I showed her how to crush seeds gently, how to set a lid of water just low enough for the bird to reach. She has a name, I asked quietly. Sloane paused. Button. Like the tiny kind that gets lost in the laundry. That's a good name. The bird barely moved, but Sloane sat beside the box for an hour, just watching. I let the soup boil over that night. Didn't care. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, and there she was, already awake, standing by the counter, watching the box and waiting for me to notice. We folded the flannel twice and tucked it into the shoebox like a cradle. Button barely stirred, her body lighter than the cloth itself. I showed Sloane how to mix seed with warm water and mash it just enough for a soft beak. She watched carefully, nodding, but not speaking. Then quietly, she said, I think she likes the corner better. It feels safer there. From then on, every morning, Sloane came into the kitchen without a word from me, sometimes before I even turned on the stove. She'd lean over the box, check Button's breathing, and ask, did she eat? And I'd answer, let's find out together. We took turns with feeding. She held the dropper. I steadied the box. Each time Button swallowed, Sloane smiled a little, like she was watching something inside herself settle. Callan saw it too. He'd stop in the doorway on his way to work. Didn't say much, just lingered a few seconds longer than usual. One morning he mouthed, thank you. I nodded, but didn't reply. We both knew it wasn't about the bird. That afternoon the sky had turned a soft gray, and Sloane sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a spoonful of soaked seeds near Button's beak. The bird pecked weakly, but she didn't seem discouraged. Then, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator, Sloane asked, do you think she hates me? I looked up from where I was folding towels. Who? My mom, she said, not meeting my eyes. She left. Maybe because of me. I set the towel down. My first instinct was to deny it, to rush into the space with soft reassurances, but something told me not to. Instead, I sat beside her knees, brushing, and let the question hang. I didn't tell her the truth about her mother, but I didn't feed the lie either. We stayed there like that, her with Button, me with nothing but stillness. And after a while, the wind outside calmed, and Sloane leaned her head just slightly toward my shoulder. The next day, she asked if we could plant something for Button, just in case she doesn't make it. Can we plant something? Sloane asked, tugging gently at the hem of my sleeve. For Button, just in case she doesn't make it. I looked at her. Really looked at her. There wasn't fear in her voice, just quiet acceptance. A little hope wrapped in realism. We walked to the garden and picked zinnias. Hardy, bright, and forgiving. They could handle clumsy hands and unexpected cold. I let Sloane choose the colors magenta gold and a pale coral she called sunset peach. I showed her how to dig the holes, loosen the roots, press the soil gently around the base. For the first time since she arrived, her hands got dirty beside mine. Earth under her nails. Soil on her knees. She laughed when the hose slipped and sprayed her socks. A real laugh, sharp and sudden, like it surprised even her. We planted 3 in a row just under the window where the morning light fell softest. So Button can see them, she whispered. That night, I stayed up later than usual, folding laundry and listening to the house breathe. As I passed through the dining room, I noticed a paper on the table, a drawing crayon and pencil, Button flying wings strong and outstretched. Behind her, a row of zinnias taller than the house. Sloane had drawn herself too, smaller, smiling, watching. The next morning, I was pouring coffee when she padded into the kitchen in her socks. She didn't look at the bird first. She looked at me. "Good morning," she said. I nearly dropped the mug, not because of the words, but because of how gently they landed, as if they'd been waiting at the edge of her throat for weeks. Callan came in right behind her, briefcase in hand. He stopped mid-step, eyes on Sloane, then me. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said more than enough. That afternoon, Button ate 3 full spoonfuls and flapped her good wing for the first time. Sloane grinned and said, "She's trying." Later that evening, Callan sat with me on the porch and said, "She talks more to you than me." Callan sat next to me on the porch after Sloane had gone to bed. The air was cooling, the sky fading to ink, but neither of us moved to go inside. "She talks more to you than me," he said, eyes fixed on the railing. I thought I could do this. Thought I could keep her steady through all this. But I don't know how. I didn't respond right away. He wasn't asking for advice. He just needed to say the words out loud. "She doesn't need you to fix her," I said after a while. "Just be near enough that she knows you won't leave." He nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together like trying to warm a part of himself that had gone cold. "I was angry," he said. "At her mother. At myself." I held it in, but maybe Sloane felt it anyway. She probably did. He exhaled hard through his nose, shaking his head. I told myself I was shielding her, that staying quiet was better. But maybe silence is just another kind of weight. I looked at him, really looked, not as my son, but as a man worn thin by choices he never thought he'd have to make. "You never said anything bad about her," he added, voice low. I didn't need to. He turned to me, then searching. "Why not?" "Because Sloane will grow up, and one day she'll see what she needs to see. I just want her to remember that someone stayed soft, even when everything else got sharp." We sat there for a while, not saying much, just letting the dark settle around us. Inside, I heard a soft creak the floorboard by Sloane's room. Maybe she'd gotten up for water. Maybe she was just listening. The porch light buzzed above us, and for a second, I thought of Button. How even the smallest thing given care could begin to mend. Callan reached for my hand and held it lightly, like when he was little and had a fever, and just needed to know I was there. The next morning, Sloane asked if birds remember the people who help them. Sloane stayed up later than usual that night. The bird had eaten well, and the sky outside was a faded blue, the kind that lingered just a little too long before letting go. We were folding towels in the living room side by side on the floor. Her small hands tried to match my folds, careful and precise, like she didn't want to ruin anything. Then, without looking up, she asked, "Did you really make Mommy leave?" I didn't speak right away. I finished folding the towel in my lap, smoothing the corners. Then I set it down. I shook my head. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt everyone, but that choice wasn't mine. She nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the seams in the rug. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way kids carry big feelings in little bodies. She said you hated her. She added, voice even smaller. I didn't flinch. "I didn't," I said softly. "I don't." And I meant it. I'd seen things, of course. The late-night texts. The unfamiliar perfume. I'd said nothing because I knew what it would cost him to see it himself. Some truths you can't say aloud. You just prepare the room for when they finally arrive. Sloane leaned into me just a little. Not enough to make a scene, but enough to be felt. She was really sad, she whispered. "I know. Daddy cried after she left. I know that, too." She didn't say anything else. Just kept folding with me until the last towel was stacked. Then she took her drawing of Button off the fridge, stared at it a while, and asked if birds ever forget where they came from. The next morning, Button took 3 steps to the edge of the shoebox and stretched both wings for the first time. Sloane clapped so quietly it was almost a whisper. Then she said, "I think she wants to fly." Button had grown stronger by the day. The tremble in her legs was gone, her feathers sleek and full again. Her little eyes, once dulled by shock, were sharp now, alert and curious. Sloane noticed it first. "She's ready to fly," she said quietly, watching Button hop along the edge of her box. We waited until the sun had warmed the garden, then carried the box outside. Sloane picked a soft spot near the zinnias, where the stems leaned just slightly toward the light. She opened the lid slowly. Hands, careful breath held. Button didn't bolt. She perched on the edge, tilted her head, and scanned the space like she was memorizing it. Then she did something we didn't expect. She hopped down, not into the air, but into the soil. Sloane gasped, a little unsure. "She's supposed to fly," she whispered. "Maybe not just yet," I said. Button chirped and wandered toward the flowers, pecking curiously at fallen petals, utterly unbothered. Sloane crouched, watching her. "She's not scared," she said. "She doesn't even need the box anymore." "No," I said, smiling. "She just needed to know she could leave." Sloane looked up at me, her face softer than I'd seen it in weeks. "Maybe she's not ready to go." "Or maybe," I said, "she knows she's safe." We sat in the grass together, legs tucked under us, watching Button peck around the garden like she belonged there. Every so often, she'd flutter her wings, testing them, but never taking off. Sloane rested her chin on her knees. "Do you think she'll stay?" "I think she'll know where to come back to." That night, Sloane drew again. This time it was Button in the zinnias, not flying, but nestled between the flowers, her wings tucked but ready. She didn't tape this one to the fridge. She placed it by her bed like a photograph. The next day, she began painting rocks to line the edge of Button's favorite path, humming softly while she worked. Sloane hummed as she painted small rocks for the garden, dipping the brush in careful strokes. She chose bright colors, red, yellow, soft green, and painted tiny shapes on each one. Flowers. Stars. A crooked little bird with one wing raised. She lined them gently around the zinnias, forming a path like stepping stones for Button. Some led to the box, others to the patch where the bird liked to sit in the morning. Her laughter came easier, now woven into the sounds of the garden. It slipped between wind chimes and bird song, part of the rhythm no longer foreign. Even Button, wild as she was, kept returning. Some days she landed on the fence, other times on the porch rail, but mostly she stayed near Sloane, pecking at the dirt by her feet, chirping lightly when the hose sprayed too far, never startled, never afraid. Sloane crouched down one afternoon, watching Button hop across the stones she'd painted. "She remembers us," she said, smiling. "Even though she's wild now, she remembers where she was loved," I replied. Sloane nodded, like she understood something bigger than either of us had said. Later that evening, we sat in the swing under the elm tree. She rested her head against my side, and we watched the last of the sun dip behind the hills. The sky turned that warm orange she always said looked like her peach crayon. "Do you think Button ever thinks about being in the box?" she asked. Maybe I said, but I think she remembers more about who sat beside her. Sloane didn't answer. She didn't have to. The quiet between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what had grown, what had healed, and what hadn't flown away. The next morning, there was a note by my coffee mug. Button was here. She sat on the box for a while, then flew to the zinnias. I think she missed them. Sloane. I folded it gently and slid it into the drawer with my old ribbons. Fall was coming, and Sloane had already asked for a coat that had extra pockets, just in case something small needed saving again. Fall settled over the garden like a shawl, cool morning's shorter light, the last blooms clinging to color. Sloane pulled her coat tight as she watered the zinnia's lips, pursed in concentration. "Button's probably gone for good," she said one morning, adjusting the little stones she'd painted. "Maybe," I replied, brushing leaves off the porch steps. She didn't sound sad. Just sure the way kids sometimes speak when they're preparing their hearts for what they can't control. That evening, I was washing dishes when I noticed a flicker through the kitchen window. Small, sharp, familiar. I dried my hands and stepped closer. Button, perched on the porch rail like she'd never left. Her feathers fluffed against the windhead tilted toward the garden. I called Sloane. She ran in socks, sliding on the floor, eyes wide the moment she saw. "Button," she whispered. We stood there together, barely breathing. The bird stayed a few minutes long enough to be certain, long enough to be seen, then flew off again. "I thought she left," Sloane said, her voice soft but steady. "She did," I answered. "Sometimes we all need to leave for a while." She turned toward me, searching. "But we can choose where we come back to, right?" I nodded. "Yes, we can." She looked back at the porch, then up at the sky where the last light hung over the hills. Her shoulders relaxed. A quiet settled over her. Not the silence she arrived with, but something gentler, worn in. Safe. Later that night, after she was asleep, I walked into her room to close the curtains. On the nightstand was another drawing button on the porch rail, a garden below, and two figures at the window standing side by side. I didn't move it, just stood there watching the slow rhythm of her breath. In the drawer with my ribbons, I placed the note she'd written beside the drawing, not because I needed proof of what had changed, but because I wanted to remember the exact day she came back to me on her own, in her time, to the place she chose.